There are two kinds of mothers in this world. One kind experiences 10 months of pregnancy, nurturing a child in their own womb. The other kind, like me, takes in an unwanted child and treats him as their own flesh and blood. But my dear, sometimes love isn't everything, and it can't heal all wounds. My name is Gertrude Miller, and I live in River Creek, Michigan, a town full of cornfields and soybean fields where everyone knows each other. The main street is wide, but once you enter the old neighborhoods like mine, the roads narrow and the sidewalks become bumpy and uneven. Even old folks like me have to watch their step carefully, afraid of slipping and falling. Our bodies aren't what they used to be. There's an old church and a central square in town where the old men always play checkers. The river isn't exactly a peace either. Sometimes when it rains heavily, the houses in the low-lying areas flood, and the whole town suffers a bit. After the 1988 floods, my late husband Joseph and I decided it was time to add a new member to our family. We already had 2 biological children, Paul, then 17, and Margaret, 15. But we always wanted more. It was Margaret who brought up the idea of adoption. She had gone to the St. Clair orphanage on the other side of town for a school project and came home with her eyes red from crying. "Mom, you really should go see those kids," she said. "Some of them have been there for years and nobody wants them because they're too old. Everyone just wants babies." Those words lingered in my mind for a long time. My husband Joseph isn't an easily moved man, but he's always respected my ideas. He's a manager at the grain warehouse, a man of few words but very honest and kind-hearted. When I told him I wanted to adopt an older child, he just looked at me, smoking his own rolled cigarette on the porch, and said slowly, "If you've thought it through, let's go take a look." My heart was pounding the first time I went to the orphanage. The place was spotless, yet it exuded an indescribable sadness. Children should be running, jumping, and making noise, but there everyone was so careful, barely daring to breathe. The director, Miss Clemens, was a thin woman with a long, drawn-out face, as if she'd just eaten a lemon. She led us into her office and asked, "Would you like to adopt a boy or a girl? And how old would you like them to be?" "We're looking for a child who truly needs a home," I said, mustering a courage I hadn't expected, a child that others might not want to adopt. It was then that she mentioned Roger for the first time. "I have a 9-year-old boy here. He came to the orphanage when he was 5. He's one of the older kids here. He's very smart, but he's withdrawn. His mother was a drug addict and died of an overdose. Nobody knows who his father is." The first time I met Roger, he was sitting alone in a corner of the yard, holding an old book. He was thin and small, with short black hair and large, dark eyes that seemed to hold the whole world. When we greeted him, he didn't smile. He just stared at us, his eyes like those of a wary little animal carefully observing us. "He doesn't talk much," Miss Clemens explained, "but he's very intelligent, gets excellent grades, but doesn't get along well with other children." At that moment, my heart as a mother made a decision. This boy needed a home. He needed me. Joseph, beside me, gripped my hand tightly. Clearly, he felt the same way. Adoption is never easy. Interviews, home visits by social workers, piles of paperwork. But I made up my mind. For months later, Roger arrived at our home with all his belongings, a small backpack containing a few clothes, a storybook, and an old plastic toy car. At first, he was incredibly quiet. Sometimes I even forgot he was home. He shared a room with Paul, who was initially very unhappy, but I told him it would be fine once we tidied up the back room. During meals, he barely spoke, just quietly picking at his food, as if afraid someone would steal it. I gradually tried to get closer to him, cooking his favorite dishes, and discovered he especially loved spaghetti bolognese. I noticed he loved reading, so I bought him many books. When he watched TV, I would sit in the living room with him. At first, whenever I approached, he would shrink back, as if waiting for something bad to happen. Seeing him like that broke my heart. The first time he smiled at me was a month after he came to live with us. I baked a chocolate cake and put a little candle in it, a slightly silly celebration, to celebrate Roger's 1-month stay. I said to him, "This is Roger's first month here." He opened his big eyes, looking surprised, and a small smile slowly crept onto his lips. It was a faint smile, tinged with shyness, but it was real. Joseph, sitting at the head of the table, saw it too, and even winked at me. That night, I thought everything would be all right. that we had made the right decision. Roger started attending a nearby school. The first few months were particularly difficult. He would come home with his notebooks torn, sometimes with dark circles under his eyes or scraped knees. "What's wrong?" I asked, my heart aching. "Nothing," he would always reply, head bowed. It was Miss Helen who told me that the other boys bullied him, calling him an orphan, an unwanted child, the kind of hurtful things only a vicious child would think of. "But he never fights back," Miss Helen said worriedly. "He just silently endures it." "That's so abnormal, Mrs. Miller. Most children would cry, fight back, or tell an adult, but he seems completely uninvolved." Days passed and things did change, but not the way I'd expected. Roger remained quiet at home, but at school, his teachers started complaining about other things. She said Roger would throw tantrums over the smallest things, like a broken pencil or a lost book. He would also cry without warning or stare blankly at something for minutes. I tried to communicate with him, but it was like talking to a wall, no response. My husband, Joseph, was getting impatient. "He needs discipline, Roger. You spoil him too much." But how could I not spoil him? Looking at his thin little face, those eyes that seemed too heavy for a 9-year-old, all I could think about was how to make him feel loved and safe. Almost a year after Roger came to live with us, he came home from school unusually late one day. It was almost dark, and I was frantic, about to go out and look for him, when he burst in. He had an unsightly cut on his chin, and his school uniform shirt was torn. "Oh my God, son, what happened?" I ran over to check his wound. This was the first time he had an emotional outburst since he came to live with us. He threw his backpack on the floor, scattering books all over the living room. "They said you adopted me for government subsidies," he yelled. "They said no one would really want a boy my age." I was stunned for several seconds, looking at this usually very restrained boy who had finally released his long-suppressed anger. I hugged him without hesitation. At first, he was stiff, but then he slowly relaxed and began to cry loudly. His cries were filled with deep pain, as if they came from the depths of his soul. "You are my son." My voice trembled with emotion, the son in my heart. There was no government subsidy, only love. "From now on, you belong to the Miller family, and no one can take you away from us." That night, I thought it was a turning point, as if some barrier in his heart had been broken down, finally allowing us into his world. He started talking more at dinner, telling us about school and asking questions about home. Joseph also gradually grew closer to him, teaching him how to fix things around the house and taking him fishing in the river on weekends. But I was wrong. Dear, terribly wrong. When we are too eager to believe something, we become blind. I didn't know then that this was just the beginning, that the story would only get harder and harder, and that one night, it would completely change the fate of our family. Roger was 11 years old when he had been living with us for almost 2 years. Everything seemed to be finally on track. He had grown taller and stronger, no longer the skinny little boy with a small backpack and timid eyes. Although his grades weren't as outstanding as they had been at the beginning, they remained at an average level. The teachers no longer sent notes complaining about his strange behavior, and he even made 2 friends in the neighborhood, Tony and Mark, who would sometimes come over to play. Around this time, my eldest son, Paul, married Louise and moved to Detroit. Margaret also left home to study nursing in Chicago. Suddenly, it was just the 3 of us, Joseph, Roger, and me living alone. The house, which used to feel cramped, now felt empty. Sometimes I wonder if Roger felt abandoned because his older siblings were gone, even though they weren't particularly close. The first thing I noticed was that small items in the house started mysteriously disappearing and then reappearing elsewhere. The scissors in the kitchen drawer ended up under his bed. The wall clock was missing for several days, then suddenly reappeared. Once, the silver rosary I inherited from my late mother went missing for a whole week. I searched everywhere, even praying to Saint Anthony, the patron saint of lost and found. Just when I was about to give up hope, I found it in a sock at the very bottom of Roger's drawer, the rosary wrapped tightly. "Son, why did you take my rosary?" I asked him, trying to sound angry. He looked at me, his eyes vacant, a look that sometimes sent chills down my spine. "I didn't take it. Someone else must have put it there." Joseph wasn't as patient as I was. "Don't lie, son. If you took it, you have to admit it. We won't raise a child to be a liar." That was the first time I saw him look at Joseph with genuine anger, a cold, unnatural gaze, completely unlike that of an 11-year-old. Then he slammed the door and went into his room, not speaking to us for the entire day. I also noticed that Roger was increasingly preferring to be alone. For his 12th birthday, Joseph saved up for months to buy him a game console. But instead of playing normal games like other boys his age, he spent all day locked in his room playing games I couldn't understand at all. One time, I suddenly went in to bring him some snacks and saw that the game he was playing was extremely violent, with blood and other horrifying images on the screen. As soon as he saw me, he quickly turned it off. "Roger, what game are you playing?" I asked, placing the plate of cake on the small table. "Nothing, Mom, just an adventure game," he replied. I told Joseph about it, but he said I was making a mountain out of a molehill. Boys this age all like these things, fighting and killing, it's normal. "You're too protective of him, Roger. He needs to learn to be a man." Sometimes Roger would come home much later than usual after school, saying he was either studying at the library or at a friend's house. I believed him for a while, until one day the school coordinator called home, asking why Roger hadn't been to school for 3 days in a row. Not at school. I was stunned. My blood seemed to freeze. "He leaves home every day wearing his school uniform and carrying his backpack. Mrs. Miller, your son hasn't been to school for 3 days. I thought he was sick." Roger came home on time as usual, pretending to have just finished school. I confronted him first. He initially denied it, saying the school had made a mistake. Only when I showed him the coordinator's note did he change his story. "I did go to school, but some boys kept bullying me, so I skipped class." "Son, why didn't you tell me? I could have helped you talk to the school." "Because you don't understand." He had never shouted at me like that before. "Do you think everyone is as good as you, that everyone is willing to help? The world isn't like that at all." Joseph had just come home from get off work and came over when he heard the commotion. I told him everything, and he was furious, his face turning red. It was the first time I'd ever seen my husband raise his hand to hit Roger, and I quickly stopped him. "No, Joseph, hitting won't solve anything. Gertrude, this boy needs discipline." Joseph shouted. "Can't you see things are out of control? He's lying, skipping school. Who knows what else he's been up to?" While we were arguing, Roger suddenly rushed out and slammed the front door shut. We were frantic and immediately called the police. He didn't return until the early hours of the morning. I waited in the living room, and when I turned on the light, I was stunned. His clothes were covered in mud, there was a scratch on his face, and his eyes, they didn't look like his own at all. His pupils were dilated, radiating a wildness. "Where have you been?" I grabbed his shoulders. "We were so worried. Just wandering around the neighborhood," he said, avoiding my gaze. "I'm going to take a shower." The next day, when I was doing his laundry, I found a lighter and a pack of cigarettes in his pants pocket. I hid and cried all day. What happened to my beloved child? What did I do wrong to let him drift further and further away from us? That period was truly unbearable. Joseph felt we should be stricter, implement disciplinary measures, and strip him of his privileges. I still tried to communicate with him, to understand what was really on his mind. I even took him to the community center to see a psychologist, but after 3 sessions, he didn't say a word. "Mrs. Miller, your son has too much pent-up anger," the doctor told me after the last session. "Children who have experienced abandonment like him often have problems with attachment and trust. He may be testing you to see if you will abandon him like his biological mother did." That makes sense. I decided to be more patient and let him know that no matter what he did, we would always be his family. Joseph didn't quite agree with this approach, but eventually gave in. "You always have a way of dealing with boys," he said in a tone that suggested he was reluctant to admit his helplessness. Around this time, Roger's body began to change. He was 13, entering puberty. His voice deepened. He developed acne, his arms and legs grew rapidly, and his clothes soon became ill-fitting. With these physical changes, he suddenly became concerned about his appearance. He used to not care what he wore, but now he wanted designer clothes and expensive sneakers, things most of us could hardly afford. "What, trying to impress some girl?" Joseph joked as he walked into the kitchen one day, his hair neatly combed with hair gel. Roger's face flushed crimson, but he didn't say a word. It was around this time that I discovered those magazines. I found them under his mattress when I was changing the sheets. They were all magazines with pictures of nude women, extremely vulgar. At first, I was shocked, but then I thought, maybe it's normal for boys to be curious at that age. but something still felt off. These were different from the magazines other teenagers read. The content was more extreme, you know what I mean? I showed the magazines to Joseph, but he just shrugged. Never mind him, Jar. Every boy this age is curious. It's better than him doing bad things outside. But that wasn't all. I noticed Roger's gaze towards me was becoming increasingly strange, making me very uncomfortable. I was almost 50 then. My hair was starting to turn gray, and my figure resembled that of someone who had given birth to 2 children. I told myself it was probably just me overthinking the ramblings of an old woman. Until one day, I entered the bathroom without knocking. The door wasn't closed properly to begin with, and saw him holding a photograph of myself, a picture from my younger days, which had always been displayed in a frame in the living room. He was startled. The photograph fell to the floor, shattering the glass of the frame. "Roger, what are you doing?" I asked, puzzled. "Nothing. I just thought this photo was quite nice," he said, pushing me aside and running out. I stood there, a chill running down my spine, a feeling I couldn't quite describe. This is so abnormal. Something's definitely wrong, but I'm afraid to admit it, afraid to even think about what's going on. When Roger was 14, things got even worse. He hardly ever came home. He'd say he was going to school in the morning, but rarely actually did. He'd come home very late at night, sometimes smelling of smoke, sometimes with a dazed look in his eyes, like he'd lost his soul. Joseph and I argued about him almost every night. My husband wanted to set stricter rules, even to send him back to the orphanage. The thought filled me with despair. "Joseph, he's our son now. We can't send him back like a defective item." "But can't you see that this child has already given up on himself?" Joseph retorted. "He doesn't respect us. He doesn't follow the rules of the house. What else has to happen before you admit things are out of control?" To be honest, I know in my heart he's right, but as a mother, I simply can't accept it. I promised that boy I would never abandon him. He's my son forever. How can I break my promise? Just then, money started going missing from the house. First, it was $50 in Joseph's wallet, which he thought he had just spent and forgotten. Then $100 was missing from my grocery envelope. And finally, my sister-in-law Clara's monthly pension, which I was keeping safe, disappeared from the dresser drawer. At this point, I could no longer deceive myself. One afternoon, Roger came home, and I confronted him directly. He was 15 years old then. The once thin, timid boy had become a tall, strong young man, his eyes sometimes vacant, sometimes defiant. "Did you take Aunt Clara's money?" I asked bluntly. "What money?" He threw his backpack on the sofa and went straight to the refrigerator. "You know exactly what I'm talking about. The $400 in my drawer, the retirement savings I'm keeping for Aunt Clara." He turned around, a can of soda in his hand, revealing for the first time a smile that terrified me, cold and mocking. "Even if I did, what can you do about it?" I stood there, speechless, for several seconds. This wasn't my Roger, not the child I had cherished for 6 years. Standing before me was a stranger possessing my son's body. "Son, why did you do this?" I cried. "If you needed money, just tell us. We're not rich, but we'll always find a way." "I'm not your son," he interrupted, his voice as cold as an adult's. "Never. You made all this up in your head." Those words were like a knife, piercing my heart. My legs went weak, and I had to hold onto the table to avoid falling. Tears streamed down my face. "Roger, don't say that," I choked out. "I've always loved you like my own son, from the first day I met you." "Love?" He laughed, a strange laugh that didn't sound like him at all. "There's no such thing as love, Mom. People just use each other. Like you and Joseph. You adopted me just to pretend to be good people, to pretend to be heroes who save orphans." He walked past me, went back to his room, leaving me alone, devastated by his words. What was wrong with him? What did I do wrong? Where did that child, who, despite his many problems, occasionally showed tenderness and gratitude, go? That day, I cried my heart out. I'd never been so heartbroken in my life. When Joseph came home from get-off work and saw me like this, he knew something terrible had happened. I told him everything, and he sat on the porch smoking one cigarette after another, silent for a long time. Finally, he said wearily, "Gert, he needs professional help, the kind we can't provide. Maybe we should find a specialized agency." "No," I cried desperately. We can't abandon him. He's just confused and lost. It's adolescence, it will pass. Joseph shook his head, his expression suggesting he knew more than he said. Gertrude, something's wrong with him, he said. It's not just a problem of adolescence, nor is it just the trauma of abandonment. Something inside this child is broken, and perhaps, even with all our love, we can't repair it. That night, I couldn't sleep a wink, reflecting on everything that had happened over the past few years. The little details I had overlooked, the changes in his behavior, his strange gaze, the ever-growing lies. Was Joseph right? Was there something about Roger that we couldn't understand or help with? I never imagined that just a few weeks later, I would get the answer. And in the worst possible way, that night completely changed everything, shattering our family beyond repair. Honey, there's an old saying, you only truly understand someone when you live under the same roof. That's how I feel about Roger. The longer he stays with us, the more I feel like a stranger living in my home, not my son. In the winter of 1994, things became even stranger. Roger was 15, with the build and deep voice of an adult, but his mind, his thoughts, were completely unlike the person I knew. Some days, he would come home and revert to the gentle boy I'd seen at the orphanage, begging me for blessings, helping Joseph fix things in the yard, and diligently doing his homework. Whenever this happened, I felt hopeful, thinking everything would be all right, that this was just a difficult period. But other days, oh God, how can I describe it? He was like a different person. His eyes were red, his gait was different, his face was gloomy, and he would lock himself in his room for hours as soon as he got home. If either Joseph or I tried to talk to him, he would fly into a rage, slamming doors and smashing things. Once, just because I asked him to turn the music down, he slammed his plate against the wall. Son, what's wrong with you? I asked him, crying as I cleaned up the broken glass and food on the floor. You don't understand at all, he would always say, looking at me with that empty, chilling gaze. It was during this time that I noticed the bruises on his arm. At first, I thought it was from a fight on the street. He was always getting into trouble in the neighborhood, so it wasn't surprising. But one day, I went into his room without knocking to deliver clean clothes, only to find him giving himself an injection in his arm. I froze at the door, the pile of t-shirts I was carrying falling to the floor. He turned around, first in shock, then in anger. Get out, he yelled, jumping out of bed. I ran back to my room, locked the door, and called Joseph, who was at work. My husband immediately dropped what he was doing and rushed home. But by the time he got home, Roger had already left with his backpack. We sat in the kitchen, at a loss. Greek, we have to send him to rehab, Joseph said, rubbing his tired face. This is out of our control. The kid's using drugs in our own home. I was still trying to defend him, saying maybe it was just cold medicine, vitamin injections, anything but what I was thinking. But deep down, I knew. My adopted son, the boy I'd promised to love and protect, had become an addict. Roger returned 2 days later. He looked like a zombie, emaciated, with sunken eyes, and shivering despite the warm summer night. Joseph grabbed his arm and made him sit at the kitchen table. It was the first time I'd ever seen my husband speak through tears. Son, look at what you've done to yourself. Look at what you've done to your mother. She can't sleep, can't eat, and spends all day by the window, waiting for you to come home. For a moment, Roger's eyes seemed to change. A flicker of guilt, even shame, flashed across them, but it quickly vanished. You don't understand, he whispered. Nobody understands. Then tell us. I gripped his hand tightly. It was cold, his fingers stiff, his nails dirty. What happened? When did you start? Why did you do this? He remained silent for a long time, head bowed, and finally, in an almost inaudible voice, said, You think you understand me, but you don't. Nobody understands me. Then tell us. Joseph insisted. We're your family. We want to help you. Roger looked up, and what he saw in his eyes sent chills down my spine, a mixture of anger and a hint of pleasure at our suffering. Family, he chuckled coldly. This isn't a family. It's just mutual exploitation. You just want a child to replace those who left, and I need a place to live. His words pierced my heart like sharp knives. I knew it wasn't true. We genuinely loved him as our own son, but hearing him say this was incredibly hurtful. It's not true. Joseph's voice hardened. You are our son. That's why we're helping you. I'll take you to rehab tomorrow. I'm not going anywhere. Roger abruptly stood up, knocking the chair over. You can't control me. You're not my parents. He slammed the front door shut, knocking over the picture frames on the wall. Joseph chased after him, but he had already disappeared into the darkness. That night, we decided that even if he didn't want to, we would send him to rehab when he came back. We had no other choice. But he didn't come back the next day, nor the third. A whole week passed and still no news. We searched everywhere, hospitals, police stations, the homes of his few friends. Nobody knew where he was. Even the homeless children living under the bridge said they had seen him before, but hadn't seen him for several days. That was one of the darkest moments of my life. Guilt gnawed at my heart like worms. What did I do wrong? What could I have done to prevent all of this? Why didn't I notice the signs sooner? Every night without news of him was torture. I imagined my son starving and freezing on the streets, being consumed by the drugs that had ruined him. It's not your fault, G. Joseph tried to comfort me, but I saw the same pain in his eyes. We've done everything we could. About 2 weeks later, one evening around dinner time, we heard a knock at the door. Joseph opened it, and there was Roger, but he was no longer the same person he had left behind. In those 2 weeks, he seemed to have aged several years, was much thinner, had an unsightly scar on his eyebrow, and his clothes were dirty and tattered. Worst of all, his eyes were empty and lost. Son, I shouted as I ran to hug him, and he almost couldn't stand. What did they do to you? He didn't answer, but just collapsed heavily into my arms. Joseph helped him into the house and onto the sofa. He had a high fever and was shivering. I wanted to call an ambulance, but Joseph thought it was inappropriate. If they find out he's been using drugs, they'll call the police, and things could get worse. Let's stay home and take care of him. I stayed by Roger's side all night, changing the cold compress on his forehead, feeding him water, and holding him when he vomited. In the early hours of the morning, when his fever was at its worst, he began hallucinating, calling out his biological mother's name, shouting for people not to hit him, crying like a child. As I listened to his incoherent ramblings, I began to piece together the story, his past, the parts we didn't know, the deep wounds buried in his heart that love alone couldn't heal. He mumbled names he'd never mentioned when he was lucid, and spoke of horrific things he'd seen and experienced. With each revelation, my heart, as his mother, clenched tighter. How much suffering had this young boy endured? In the morning, his fever subsided a bit, and he woke up, looking around groggily before seeing me sitting in the chair beside him. Mom, he said, his voice returning to that of the 9-year-old boy who had come to our house with his little backpack. You're still here? I'm here, son, I said, taking his hand. I won't leave you. For a fleeting moment, I saw a tear slide down his cheek. For the first time in a long time, he was finally like the Roger I knew again, not the stranger who had taken over his body. I'm sorry, he whispered. I didn't mean to. I didn't want to hurt you. I know, son, I know, I said. We'll help you now. Everything will be all right. But I was wrong again, my dear. Things will never be the same again. I never imagined that lucid, regretful moment was just the calm before the storm, a storm that would completely change our lives. For the next few days, we took care of Roger at home. The withdrawal process was so painful. Watching him break out in a cold sweat, trembling, vomiting, and even convulsing broke my heart. Joseph wanted to take him to a hospital, but I was afraid they would send him to something worse, or back to some government agency. So, Joseph and I took turns watching over him, never leaving his side. Slowly, he got better. His face regained color, his appetite returned, and his trembling lessened. As he recovered, his behavior changed. He became the polite, even somewhat considerate Roger he used to be. He apologized for what he had done, thanked us for our care, and promised never to use drugs or steal again. And we, like fools, believed him. Joseph even took a week off to stay home and watch over him, making sure he didn't go out alone and didn't go back to his old ways. But he still had to go to work eventually. Life doesn't stop just because we're having difficulties, right, darling? Bills to pay, food to buy, rent to pay. In the first few weeks of October, everything seemed to be back on track. Roger returned to school, came home on time, did his homework diligently, and even helped with chores. He earned money by mowing the neighbor's lawn and would wash the dishes without being told. We even planned to send him to a vocational school next year to learn a trade. One evening, the three of us were having dinner together, something we hadn't done in a long time. Roger looked at me, his big eyes no longer clouded by drugs, and said something I'll never forget. "Mom, you've always wanted to know why I started doing drugs, haven't you?" Joseph and I tensed up immediately. We had always avoided this topic, afraid of triggering bad memories and awakening the Roger that terrified us. "Son, if you want to say something," I answered cautiously. "I want to say," he took a deep breath, "because my biological mother wasn't the woman who died of a drug overdose when I was little. That was a lie the orphanage made up. When I was 4, she abandoned me, leaving me at the door of a church with only a note. I never knew why." Hearing this, my heart clenched. For so many years, I had never been able to get him to talk about his past. Later, I went from one family to another, from one orphanage to another. In one of those orphanages, there was a staff member, he paused, swallowing hard, who did some bad things to the children, really bad things. Joseph put down his fork, his face flushed with anger. I felt a wave of nausea rise in my throat. "So, when you adopted me, I simply couldn't believe that anyone would genuinely want me, take care of me, and ask for nothing in return." He wiped his tears with the back of his hand. Later at school, I met some older boys who gave me that stuff, saying it would make the pain disappear. For a while, it really worked. When I was on drugs, I didn't remember anything. I couldn't feel anything. I stood up from the table, went over, and hugged my son tightly. Joseph came over and put his hand on his shoulder. In that moment, it seemed we finally broke down the barrier and touched the real Roger, the wounded boy who desperately craved love but didn't know how to receive it. "Son, everything will be all right now." I kissed the top of his head and promised, "We'll get through this together as a family." That night, I lay beside Joseph, filled with hope. We finally understood what had happened to our son and could finally truly help him. "I feel like everything will be all right now," I said to my husband, turning off the light. "He's open up to us." Joseph was silent for a moment, then sighed. "I hope so, but I still feel something's not right. There's something in his eyes that worries me." "That's trauma, Joseph," I said. "This child has gone through things we can't even imagine. He needs time, but he'll be all right. You just wait and see." I rested my head on my husband's chest and fell asleep, feeling a peace I hadn't felt in years. I never imagined that would be the last peaceful night we would spend in that house. Because less than a week later, something happened that I couldn't even imagine in my own nightmares, and it happened in my own home. It was a Thursday in late October 1994, nothing out of the ordinary. The weather was muggy, and in River Creek, that meant a storm was brewing. Roger went to school that morning, came home on time, and even ate dinner with us. Rice, beans, and stewed chicken, which I'd made. He wasn't much of a talker, but that wasn't unusual. He'd been like that sometimes ever since we'd talked about his past, lost in his own thoughts. At dinner, Joseph mentioned he had to be at work early the next day. A large shipment was arriving at the grain warehouse, and as supervisor, he had to be there before everyone else. I remember Roger giving Joseph a strange look when he heard that, but I didn't think much of it at the time. After dinner, Roger said he was going back to his room to study for his exam. Joseph watched the news on TV in the living room, and I took a shower after tidying up the kitchen. This was our daily routine, just like any other night. Around 10 p.m., Joseph went into the bedroom. He was exhausted and fell asleep quickly. I stayed awake for a while, praying as usual, thanking everyone that things were finally back on track. It started raining outside, and I fell asleep to the sound of the rain. It was a heavy downpour, accompanied by thunder, making you want to curl up in bed, grateful for having a home to shelter you from the storm. I don't know exactly what time I woke up, probably around 3 or 4 in the morning. The rain had stopped, but the air was still damp and stuffy. I opened my eyes and had a strange feeling, like someone was watching me. You know that chill down your spine? It's when something feels wrong. At first, I thought it was just a nightmare and I was still a little groggy after waking up. But then, I saw a shadow moving in the bedroom. I was startled, thinking a thief had climbed in through the window. I was about to call Joseph when the shadow walked towards the bed, and my heart nearly stopped. It was Roger. He stood by my bed, looking at me with a gaze I'll never forget. It wasn't my son's gaze, but that of a stranger, cold empty, yet filled with a powerful possessiveness. "Roger," I called softly, confused. "What's wrong, son? Are you feeling unwell?" He didn't answer, just continued to stare at me with that chilling gaze that seemed to freeze my very soul. I then noticed he wasn't wearing a shirt, only shorts. As my eyes adjusted to the darkness, I saw something that suffocated me. His body was reacting in a way that no mother should ever see. "What are you doing?" I cried, my voice trembling, trying to sit up and get away from him. But he moved quickly, covering my mouth with a hand to stifle my scream. "Don't wake Joseph," he whispered, leaning closer. "I don't want to hurt him." The fear I felt at that moment was indescribable. That was my son, whom I had raised with all my love, the child I had promised to protect, but now he was like a wild beast, ready to attack his own mother. I struggled desperately, trying to push him away, but Roger was too strong, much stronger than I had imagined. He climbed onto the bed and pinned me down. His weight immobilized me, and the hand covering my mouth tightened so much I could barely breathe. "I've always wanted to do this," he whispered in my ear, words that made me want to vomit. "From the first day I came to this house, haven't you noticed how I look at you? How I follow you?" Tears streamed down my face as I desperately tried to wake Joseph, who slept on the other side of the bed, but my husband was a heavy sleeper and rarely disturbed. I looked at Roger with pleading eyes, hoping he would stop and return to the boy I knew and loved. For a moment, he seemed to hesitate, a flicker of confusion in his eyes, as if for a fleeting second he had come to his senses. But soon, that empty look returned, and he started pulling at the sheets covering me. Just then, Joseph finally woke up. Perhaps it was the movement on the bed, or perhaps it was my father's intuition. I don't know. All I know is that suddenly, I heard my husband's voice, initially confused, then filled with a fear I'd never heard before. "What the hell is going on?" Joseph roared, sitting bolt upright. Roger jumped, turning his head, but didn't get off me. It was as if the last shred of humanity in his heart had completely collapsed. "Let her go," Joseph roared, with a strength I'd never imagined. A 55-year-old man with such power, he lunged at Roger. They both fell to the floor, knocking over the bedside lamp. I heard screams, the sounds of fighting, and things breaking. My hands trembled as I turned on the bedroom light. The scene before me is unforgettable. Joseph and Roger were wrestling on the floor, my husband desperately trying to subdue our son, while Roger struggled like a wild beast. "Call the police, Gertrude," Joseph yelled at me, gripping Roger's arm tightly. "Go now." But I froze, terrified, unable to believe what I was seeing. How had we come to this? The boy I had promised to love and protect had become a monster. Suddenly, Roger broke free from Joseph's grasp. I saw him pick something up from the ground, a broken lamp. Before I could even cry out, he slammed it down on Joseph's head with all his might. Joseph fell backward, a bloody gash running down his forehead. He didn't pass out, but remained unconscious for a long time. Roger stood up, looked at his bleeding father on the ground, then at me, and gave me a smile that didn't seem human. "Look what you've forced me to do," he said, pointing at Joseph. "If you had behaved, none of this would have happened." The voice wasn't the Roger I knew. It belonged to something that had taken over his body. At that moment, an instinct I'd never felt before surged within me. I jumped out of bed, ran past Roger, and dashed into the hallway. "Help!" I yelled as I ran toward the front door. "Is anyone there? Help!" Roger chased after me, but tripped over the furniture in the dark living room. I finally reached the door, my fingers trembling as I unlocked it, and rushed into the street in my pajamas. The night was cold and damp after the rain, but I felt no cold at all. I just ran as fast as I could, screaming for help. Mr. Arnold, our neighbor across the street, was the first to run out, followed by Mrs. Louise from next door. Soon, 6 or 7 neighbors had gathered on the street, all looking confused and terrified at a woman in her pajamas, desperately screaming in the middle of the night. "My son, my husband, please call the police." Mr. Arnold and his eldest son, a security guard, rushed into our house. Roger was gone. He had jumped over the backyard fence and escaped. Later, we found Joseph sitting on the sofa in the living room, pressing a cloth against a wound on his forehead, pale and trembling. The police arrived almost half an hour later. That's how slow things were in small towns back then. Sheriff Oswald had known our family for many years, and when we told him what had happened, he couldn't believe it. "Mrs. Miller, are you sure? Roger? That quiet boy." How could I explain to others that my son, whom I had raised for 6 years, had tried to— I couldn't even say the word. How could I admit that the boy, who seemed shy and polite to everyone, harbored a face that none of us living under the same roof truly understood? The police searched the entire town, but Roger seemed to have vanished into thin air. Joseph was taken to a small hospital in River Creek, where the doctor stitched up his forehead and prescribed sedatives for both of us. When we returned home the next morning, the house was a mess, as if it had been ravaged by a hurricane. Furniture was smashed, glass shards were everywhere, and there was blood on the bedroom carpet. But the worst part wasn't the visible chaos, but the irreparable sense of shattering. Our family, our trust, our sense of security, all gone. I couldn't sleep well for several days. At night, I would jump out of bed at the slightest sound, thinking it was him coming home. My usually strong husband, Joseph, completely broke down. It wasn't just physical wounds, but also emotional trauma. He felt he had failed as a father, failing to discover the evil lurking under his roof. 3 days passed, and there was still no news of Roger. One afternoon, the phone rang. It was Sheriff Oswald calling. "Mrs. Miller, we've found Roger." My heart leaped into my throat. My maternal instincts kicked in, and my first thought was whether he was all right, whether he was hurt. "Where is he? How is he?" There was a moment of silence on the other end of the line. Then the sheriff's heavy voice came through. "He's alive, but not well, Mrs. Miller. We found him in an abandoned house near the train station. He overdosed on drugs and looks like he tried to commit suicide." At that moment, the world seemed to stand still. Whatever had happened, he was still my son, the child I had promised never to abandon. "We took him to the hospital first," the sheriff continued, "and then we'll transfer him to the mental hospital in Grand Rapids. The doctor said that besides his drug addiction, he also has serious mental health issues." I don't know how I hung up the phone or how I told Joseph the news. All I know is that we went to see Roger at the hospital that afternoon. He was handcuffed to the bed, disoriented, his eyes half open, seemingly not recognizing us at all, or perhaps he was pretending not to. I held his cold, lifeless hand, crying until my tears ran dry. "Why, son?" I asked, knowing full well there would be no answer. "Why did this happen?" The next day, he was transferred to a mental hospital. A week later, we were granted visitation permission. It was a somber place. The white walls were peeling and crumbling, and the corridors were filled with people with vacant eyes, wandering aimlessly. Before the visit, a doctor greeted us. He was young, with sunken eyes and thinning hair. "Your son's situation is complicated," he explained, flipping through a folder. "Schizophrenia, antisocial personality disorder, plus drug addiction. These problems may have existed when you adopted him, only slowly manifesting themselves, and the drug addiction made things worse." I remained silent, processing these heavy words, which attempted to explain why our son had become a complete stranger to us. "Does he remember what he did?" Joseph's voice was hoarse. The doctor adjusted his glasses. "Sometimes he remembers, sometimes he doesn't. He'll be lucid at times, showing remorse, and at other times he'll deny everything, or say you deserved it. This is typical of his condition. He can't maintain coherent thinking." Finally, we entered Roger's room, and I almost didn't recognize him. He had become thinner, his cheeks sunken, his eyes deep-set, and his hair cut very short. He sat on the bed, looking out at the iron bars on the windows. "Son," I called cautiously. He slowly turned his head, and for a fleeting moment, I saw a glimpse of the Roger I once knew in his eyes, the timid boy with the small backpack from 6 years ago. But quickly, that empty, distant look returned. "What are you doing here?" His voice was flat and devoid of emotion. "We came to see how you are," Joseph replied, standing not far away. I could sense that my husband could no longer look at Roger the way he used to. Something between them was broken forever. Roger gave a dry, emotionless laugh. "Isn't it too late to care now?" "It's never too late, son. I was still trying to awaken something that might still be extinguished deep within him." "You're sick, but you'll get better." "What if I get better?" he interrupted, his voice becoming agitated. Me come back to this family? After what I did, can we still be a happy family? I was speechless, because I knew in my heart that he was right. Everything was irreversible. Even if one day he truly recovered, even if one day we could forgive him, those scars would remain forever. That was the last time we saw Roger. A few weeks later, he was transferred to a security-based mental hospital in Detroit, a place specifically for mentally ill criminals. The judge ruled that he would receive long-term treatment there until he recovered, if there was any possibility of recovery. Joseph and I returned home, living an empty and meaningless life. This house, once full of hope, was now haunted by memories. Every corner, every piece of furniture, every photograph on the wall told a different story, but all ended in the same painful conclusion. We tried to look forward, but we could never go back to the way things were. My strong husband, Joseph, began to drink heavily. At night, I could always hear him pacing around the house, checking the locks on the doors and windows, even bending down to look under the bed, as if he were still afraid some monster was lurking there. I myself started having nightmares, often waking up in a cold sweat, the same question constantly swirling in my mind. Why didn't we notice? Why didn't we realize that something so terrible was happening right under our noses? Were we so desperate to save the boy that we deliberately ignored the signs? Now, I sit on the porch of this old house, watching the Rio Grande flow quietly, as if nothing had happened. More than 30 years have passed, and as people say, time doesn't heal all wounds, but it teaches us how to live with scars. My husband, Joseph, died of a heart attack in 2003, and since that terrible night, he has never truly been happy, carrying a burden of guilt that shouldn't belong to him. I should have found out sooner, Joseph, he would sometimes say, usually after a few drinks. I should have protected you. Our biological children, Paul and Margaret, have done everything they can to support us, but they live far away and have their own families and lives. To be honest, I think they also feel some guilt because they weren't there when it happened, leaving their elderly parents and that troubled boy alone at home. As for Roger, we occasionally get news of him through social services. All these years later, he's still in the mental hospital. His condition fluctuates. In 2008, he was evaluated for discharge, but subsequently suffered a violent relapse and returned to the intensive care unit. About 2 years ago, I received his last letter, saying he was stable, on medication, and participating in therapy, but he would never truly be free, neither from the mental hospital nor from the demons within. I didn't visit Joseph when he died. I didn't go on important holidays either. Some people might accuse me of abandoning my son when he needed me most. But the truth is, every time I see him, I'm reminded of that night. Even so, my dear, my heart still aches whenever I think of him. Not of Roger on that terrible night, but of that 9-year-old boy with big, fearful eyes, carrying a small backpack containing all his belongings. My son who was briefly, truly mine. As time went on, I learned some lessons that I'd like to share with you. Perhaps this can help parents who are going through similar situations, and hopefully your situation won't be as extreme as ours. In the years since that night, I've met several other families with similar experiences. While their situations weren't exactly the same, their children also had serious mental health issues, becoming violent and dangerous. This kind of thing is more common than we imagine, but no one wants to talk about it. There seems to be a silent understanding, an admission that one's child might be a threat, a mother's greatest failure. We even formed a support group in River Creek, meeting once a month at church. We share our stories, our pain, and our small triumphs. Knowing that we're not alone, knowing that other mothers are carrying similar secrets, makes us feel a little better. Now I'm 76 years old, and looking back, although this tragedy has left its mark on my life, it hasn't defined it. I've also had happy times. Paul's wedding, the birth of my grandchildren, the days when Margaret came back from Chicago to visit me. Even when I sometimes feel lost about the future, life goes on. If you are going through something similar, if you have a child with mental health issues who has become aggressive, please don't be ashamed to seek help. Don't wait until it's too late to regret, like I did. Don't let love blind you to real danger. Remember, acknowledging that your child needs more help than you can give doesn't make you a bad mother. If my story can help someone avoid repeating my mistakes, then sharing this long-buried pain is worthwhile. Thank you for listening to me. Thank you for letting me speak my heart. May God bless you and your family, and may evil forever stay away from you.